You mean all the little boxes, yeah?
Yeah. Evening, Ronnie, you all right?
Yes, fine, Andy. How are you, mate? All right?
Yeah, good. Hope you had a good day. Long journey.
Yeah, it was okay. Yeah, quite tiring. I've just had a little sleep after coming home.
Don't blame you.
Yeah, it's quite a it's a bit of a distance, but yeah, it's always sad, these occasions, on someone's funeral. But as funerals go, it was quite an uplifting event, really. So that was good.
Yeah. No, they're never exciting times, are they?
Not really, no. I mean, I've been to some pretty awful funerals, but this one wasn't. It was like there was no religion in it at all, which was really good.
Yeah, I'm quite a fan of, although I've never actually attended one. Whilst we're on the morbid conversation, there's quite a few I've seen now of these kind of like they're in the middle of nowhere kind of burials.
This was a green.
Was that one of those? Yeah. I've not actually ever been to one to see what they're like.
Yeah, I've been to a couple. One was really quite a number of years ago. Neil Lee, who was a prominent animal rights activist.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably the last time we went to one together, wasn't it, Ronnie?
Because funnily enough, there's quite a big one, a really nice place, in fact, that's not too far away from us, just down the road from Great Orme, where they have that mink hunt every year.
Oh right, yes.
So I've drove past it a few times, and it looks lovely. But you don't really want an excuse to go to a funeral just to see what it's like. But I've
never No. This one, it looked like a place that hadn't been going all that long. This particular one, it was in a bit of a kind of semi kind of woodland type setting, you might say, and the casket was like wicker, was made of wicker.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that was what I think. Neil's was the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still think I'll be cremated regardless, just because it's easier.
I'd sooner just kind of be left out for other animals to eat.
I mean, I wish that was something that you could do, but yeah.
Providing I wasn't sort of at the time pumped full of medications that might do them harm. That's the only kind of possible negative aspect of that. Because if someone's, it depends how they died, but if someone's like very ill and they die, normally they'll have been on a lot of medication, won't they? And that'll be in their body. So I don't know what effect that would be of an animal that might eat that. That's the only thing I'd think I'd be concerned about in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point, to be fair. And I suppose, especially in the UK, it's not like we've got loads of free living beings that would be really interested for a while. It would take.
It's not a large.
You're relying on the corvids.
Yeah, there aren't the large. There aren't any sort of large carnivores, I suppose you might say, that would kind of very quickly devour human body, are there? To be honest.
No, I mean that's one of the things that quite often makes me laugh when people go, well, it's much better what happens to cows than what would happen to them in the wild. Well, what would happen to them in the wild? Who's their kind of threat? Who's the predator to cows in the UK? A dog?
Well, there aren't any. I mean, we had wolves and bears at one time. Of course, it was humans that wiped them out.
Yep.
Surprise, surprise.
The biggest threat to free living cows would also be humans.
Yeah, of course it would. So, it's the same problem as now.
Yes, it would. It would be.
That terrible fate that they talk about in the wild is just complete myth, and especially in the UK.
I think the thing is just because, just because another animal might die anyway or might be killed anyway isn't an excuse for humans.
No, I mean, let's look at it this way. Let's imagine that when you were born, we could look in like a Mystic Meg crystal ball and we could see into your future. And we could see that at some point as an adult, you were going to have a terrible accident that was going to be really, really full of pain and suffering. And so because that was going to happen at some point, we might as well exploit you from birth, right? I mean, obviously that's the normal procedure. That's essentially what people are alleging. Because there's a possibility or a potentiality that this could happen, we have the right to do this.
Yeah, well, I could go along the street, killing other humans. And my excuse for doing so would be, well, I've done them a favour because at some time in their life they may have had cancer and some other painful illness, and so I've killed them.
Especially
now.
It was very quick, very humane.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it all just falls into this kind of like welfare thinking, doesn't it? Because we're trying to avoid the suffering part without looking at the moral wrong, without looking at the actual problem.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah. So I mean, where's the best place to pick up from or to start off from?
Yeah, easier. Asked than answered.
You're normally the organizer of us, so I thought you'd have that bit covered.
I've got a list. So we've got Operation Valentine. We've got the problem of getting homes in the end. We ought to talk about the fact that back in the day, because it's something that modern day vegans have a lot of difficulty understanding, is that most of the animal sanctuaries that we knew back then weren't run by vegans.
Yeah.
So there's that. The animal rights militia and, the kind of people or the kind of groups that didn't want to abide by the ALF policies, that's a possible. Then Ronnie wrote tensions between the ALF and the League, especially the now.
Yes. That's what I'm particularly interested in hearing about. Yeah.
Well, that's really, in a sense, kind of comes before Operation Valentine, because Operation Valentine was the only thing that the ALF ever did that was in any way, I suppose, similar to what the Animal Liberation Leagues did. So that would kind of that would sort of fit in if we were to discuss, the ALF and the NAL and the other Animal Liberation Leagues. That would kind of fit in with that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm assuming it was just a policy difference that was what you clashed on. Because I mean, essentially, you wanted the same things. You just had different ideas about going about it.
It was an operational difference as well, really, and it was an ideological difference too, to a considerable extent. I mean, with the ALF, the ALF really was. Usually fairly small groups of activists, sometimes very small groups of activists, perhaps just a couple or maybe one person on their own, carrying out actions. Where animals were rescued, that would sometimes require more people, especially if the larger animals, say like beagles were being rescued from a breeding centre for laboratories or something, and there were these sort of rescue raids where you could maybe have 10 people, even a dozen people taking part. I mean, I remember going on one on a battery farm where we rescued hens from the cages where there were about a dozen people, because you kind of needed that number if you were going to get a kind of large number. That was very rare. And it was usually, but even that, like a dozen people was a small number compared with what the Animal Liberation Leagues would really have on their activities, which would be, there'd be dozens, there's really large groups. And the ALF
they were into exposés, weren't they?
They were, yeah. The ALF was into rescuing animals or causing damage, and actions almost always took place late at night or in the early hours of the morning. Small groups of people. Yeah,
creeping around in the dead of the night. That's what the said about that.
Just sensible.
Whereas now
I mean, just on that note, because I think this is a good thing to point out. The best night of the year for liberation. Just saying, I'm not condoning this behaviour in any way, shape, or form. Of course, just suggesting. But the best night of the year for liberation is New Year's Eve. Because even the people that usually get paid to watch these things aren't really paying any attention. Just saying.
No, and actions did very often take place on New Year's Eve and also Christmas Eve.
Yes,
You know, the early hours of Christmas Day.
and it's something the whole world's celebrating, right? Regardless. So
yeah. Because when I was the press officer, I always used to be in the office Christmas Day, in case there were any calls coming from the media, because I knew there'd be a lot of activity.
Oh, I thought it was because you didn't have any mates, Ronnie.
Well, that was probably one reason. Yeah, but what I would do is I would kind of celebrate with my friends a day earlier, a couple of days earlier. I'd visit friends or whatever, because I knew that on the actual Christmas Day I'd be in the office.
Yeah.
It didn't bother me. I wasn't that bothered in Christmas anyway, to be quite honest. And I think maybe the same with New Year. I've never been big into celebrating New Year, because it's just like, another year, just the same shit as the year before, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. No, it's definitely a night I would sort of recommend.
I can't stand. I really don't like. I really don't like all the New Year bollocks.
Going back to the now or the
on that note, should we introduce these groups? Because I suppose some people probably won't know who they are.
Yeah. So I mean, the first Animal Liberation League was called the Northern Animal Liberation League, and then they became several others, but the now was the one that I was associated with.
Yeah, just for anyone that's seen the clip that I've shared a number of times, where it's a group of guys sat on a hill and they say, "We're not animal lovers. It's just like our neighbours. We respect animals." That clip, that's from the now.
Yeah, that's the now. Yeah, and that's from the very end of the Animals film.
That's right.
Which was a bit of a cringe fest, really. That at the end of that.
The bit that ruins that is the 5 or 6 seconds afterwards, where they're doing like the karate on the hill. It looks like some sort of like montage.
Yeah, it is a bit bad.
Because that wording is excellent, which is why I always share that clip, and it's kind of spoilt by the bit that comes afterwards. Yeah,
you'll have to cover it over.
I mean, whether they really did any training like that, I don't know. I mean,
they were non-violent, weren't they? So
that was just for the cameras. The important thing, I suppose, about the now and the fact that they're into exposés was we're talking about pre-internet.
Yes.
And their idea was to expose animal use to the general public, but also they had this idea that if the advocates went into animal use facilities, then they would kind of get a real kind of feel for it over and above, say, watching a film. Because if you go into a battery unit, or a broiler unit or a pig unit, you suddenly feel the heat, the smell, obviously, and just the general kind of, ambience of it. And you can never forget it, really.
No, I mean, and that's also one of the things that's very hard to convey to people. You can take photos and videos, but the smell, the heat, the actual experience of being there is quite often very difficult to explain to people. I mean, I've been into places before a couple of times where even 3-4 days later, you can still smell them. You've showered, you've washed your clothes, you've done everything that you can possibly do, but that smell is just like up your nose and you can't get rid of it.
Yeah, it seems to get kind of lodged there. And then you've got the difficulty of the fact that you're back there having a shower and everything, and you've left them.
Of course, and yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, going back to what we was discussing last week, I've only ever actually had to do it once, and it was a turkey farm. But the cases where you go somewhere and the numbers exceed the amount of places or volunteers that you have, and so you're picking and choosing essentially who you save, that's not a nice experience, because as kind of liberating, I suppose, to use the word, it's a feeling is, knowing you've saved some, it's also very sort of like guilt-wrenching to know that you've left many others behind.
Yeah, it is indeed. So, Ronnie, here's a question. Do you know anybody from the old Liberation Leagues, whichever one, that is still active? Because I don't.
No, not as far as I'm aware. There was another group that may have come after the Liberation Leagues called the Animal Liberation Investigation Unit. And I think they were the group that was responsible. There's a raid on there's a raid on the Boots laboratory. Boots the chemist. They used to have an animal research laboratory in Nottinghamshire, and of course there was a big campaign against Boots because of this laboratory, and action was taken against quite a few.
Yeah, I mean, all the vegans I knew used to boycott Boots.
Boycott Halfords as well. Halfords were owned by Boots. I don't know whether they still are. And Boots had this laboratory, and there was a raid on the laboratory. And I think that was by a group called the Animal Liberation Investigation Unit. And the idea was to get paperwork out, was to just because, and this was also something that the Animal Liberation Leagues did, was they would get paperwork out of the laboratory, in order to copy it, to get evidence of what was going on at the laboratory.
I'm with you. Yeah. At first I was thinking, what do you mean? But yeah. You're talking about like evidence, yeah.
Yeah. The idea was then to return the original documents. You see, because where there's an intention not to permanently deprive the owner of property.
Yeah, you're not actually breaking a law.
Not an actual criminal offence.
Clever, yeah.
What they were doing, providing there wasn't any damage done in
the process. Does that law still apply now?
Oh, yes, I'm quite sure it's...
Because I was just thinking, hypothetically, obviously the world's moved forward now, and you wouldn't need to go in and do that. You'd probably just go in with a USB stick, right? So if you went in and shoved a USB stick in one of their computers and moved a load of folders onto the USB stick and left, I mean, you haven't took anything from them.
I don't think it's contrary to the law of theft.
No, it'd be industrial sabotage or something, wouldn't it?
Maybe other laws now that cover that.
Yeah, I was going to say they'd have to try and cover that somewhere. Otherwise, that would be a very easy way of just walking into one of these places and taking everything.
Yeah, to be guilty of theft, you have to have an intention to permanently deprive the owner of the property. So if I went over to the next door's garden and got the guy's lawnmower, and said that, an electric lawnmower, plugged it into my electric, mowed my lawn with it, and then took it back, then I'm not committing any offence. I mean, you're committing a civil act. You could sue you.
Yes,
I could sue, but you can't.
They could do you for wear and tear. Here's an interesting one.
Possibly.
Yeah, we got loads of documents out of Hazleton once to do with Japanese, because Hazleton was a contract laboratory, and then it turned into Covance, and now it's called even something else now. And they were experiments on paraquat, and there were some pretty vicious experiments. I won't describe them. But we took the documents to Robert Sharp, who was the NAV's scientific advisor, so he could kind of like translate it all into English, as it were. And it ended up in his book. I think it was called The Cruel Deception. There was about 3 or 4 pages.
Oh yes, yeah.
And it was, all the rest of it. But one of the places where we found a lot of documents was the bins. So we didn't bother to take those ones back, because we thought, well, they've already thrown them out. But I think technically that it's probably still their property, even if it was in the bins.
Technically, yes, because I think, yes, I think it is. I think it is technically their property.
Yeah, I mean, you get homeless people that get in trouble for stealing food, right? So, yeah, makes sense. Unless they've actually given it away specifically. I think even if you take it from a bin, it still could be classed as theft if they wanted to push it.
But that raid, that Animal Liberation Investigation Unit, right? For instance, I know, I still know some people that are involved with the Animal Liberation Leagues. Very few that took part in those actions. I mean, that raid on Boots. I mean, like Louise, my wife, she took part in that, and they arrested 43 people, and who were charged with theft and criminal damage. The police.
I guess what we should do is do an entire program about the leagues and about the investigation unit. Separate from the ALF, in the sense that I mean, like, for example, there's the Battery 22 that I was involved in, we could talk about.
Yes,
But that wasn't ALF, so we ought to stick with ALF, I suppose.
But yeah, that's right. But going back to the tension, you see, I think that one of the differences, I mean, certainly, especially with the Northern Animal Liberation League, there was a very there was really a kind of sort of socialist ideology that lay behind behind them. All these people together doing something communally, which were the mass raids on places, whereas the ALF had more of an anarchist ethos. All these small decentralized groups of people doing stuff, and so there was this sort of clash of, in a sense, of political ideologies between.
What, a difference on the left? I don't believe it.
Yeah, difference on the left. Yeah, and that and you see, I mean, my view was that it depended on what, I suppose, in a sense, kind of what your aims were, because at the time, being very much involved in the ALF, I wanted to see maximum damage caused to these places. That was because we developed this kind of idea of economic sabotage. You cause as much damage as possible to these various establishments that oppress other animals, in order to put them out of business, to force them to close, to put them out of business. And so, and I thought the most efficient way of doing that was to have lots of small groups of people all over the country going out and doing it.
Yeah, well, one of the main complaints from the ALF about the NAL was the fact that they went to all the trouble of getting into places, and then they left everything intact.
Yeah. I mean, I had that complaint, concern about some of the ALF groups, to be honest, because there were some ALF groups that were very much focused on animal rescue, and they make a complicated entry into a place, rescue some animals, and then and they didn't damage anything, and it used to frustrate me that had happened and no damage had been caused, because I felt that the damage made far more of an impact on the company than taking the animals.
Is there no way that you could have, like, I mean, obviously it's hindsight now, but like, could have worked together so they were kind of more like a scouting group or an intel gathering?
There was a theory developed along those lines, and it was put into practice by some groups, where what would happen is you'd have two teams of people, and what would happen is there'd be a small group that would make the entry, because if there were sort of alarms on the place or some kind of security, then there'd be a small group of people that would go in and bypass that, because if the police came, then that was only a small number of people that would be arrested, right? And then that group kind of withdrew, and a larger group went in and took the animals away. And when the animals were safely away, that smaller group would then went back and caused damage. And that was this kind of a kind of tactic, I suppose, that the
rebound strategy.
Yeah, and it was used.
Yeah, but it makes sense, because I mean, if they were going into these places and putting the effort in to kind of survey them and work out ways of getting in and all that sort of stuff, it does seem a bit kind of fruitless for them to not at least pass that information on to another group who will do the things they won't, even if they don't want to do them. Because you've got that information now, you've established a way in or a way out or all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So it would just make sense to share it.
And there were, I mean, places did start putting in, more places did start putting in a level of security. Obviously, as ALF actions escalated. And so we were constantly trying to devise ways around these things, and kind of stuff would be sent out anonymously sometimes all around the animal rights movement about how to kind of there was one copy of the Animal Liberation Front Supporters Group newsletter that had this picture. It was like a kind of picture strip thing on one or two of the pages about how to break into somewhere, how to kind of and I think that was about kind of bypassing security and
That was one of the things that I was going to ask you. You know, like last week you were talking about the difference in policies between the UK and the US, for example. But like, how was that kind of information distributed in the first place? Like, how would you even know who was a member and who wasn't, so to speak?
Well, I think what happened,
You didn't.
you didn't. You just. It was just kind of widely. It was just mailed out to like loads of people that might possibly be interested. It was just.
And I'm assuming
just,
that the vast majority of them were once upon a time or still SABs, and that's how you kind of come to know
possibly
them.
because it was just information about kind of how you do certain things, and probably most people ignored it and didn't use it. But it was just hope. It was like scattering seed and hoping that some would fall on fertile ground.
Yeah, there was also the Anarchist Cookbook, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was Anarchist Cookbook, and that had some, I think, some useful. There was some of the stuff would, some of it was stuff that, ALF people probably wouldn't use, but others of it was, and there were all these different ways of. I mean, it does seem very difficult. It would all seem very difficult to people these days in the age of the internet, when spreading information is so easy.
I remember back in Liverpool, the police hammering on our front door while we were burning the Anarchist cookbook in the back kitchen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's quite ironic, burning a cookbook, isn't it?
Yeah, we were boiling it.
Yeah. Especially the Anarchist Cookbook. That seems almost like really disappointing that you only burnt it and you didn't do something a bit more exciting, like napalm it.
Yeah, you could have.
So where do you want to go to next, then, Ronnie?
Sorry? Where
do you want to go to next? I tell you one thing, because you've got on your list ALF thrown out of the BUAV, but before that you had a PO box in Peace News in Nottingham, didn't you?
What happened was, because I kind of when I first kind of got involved with the Hunt Saboteurs and then the Animal Liberation Front, I was also pretty much at the same time, perhaps a little bit after my involvement in the Hunt Sabs, I kind of got involved in the peace movement, and I think that might have been from somewhere getting a hold of a copy of Peace News and reading it and think, these people, I agree with the ideas that these people have got, because Peace News were like anarcho-pacifists, really. That would be how they describe themselves politically. And I was like, sort of very much into that at the time. And I started writing articles for Peace News, or news items for Peace News about the Hunt Sabs. And then I started doing the same about ALF actions. And, they were, at the start, they were very sympathetic. And, in kind of in the early days. And so when the ALF started kind of, getting bigger, and we wanted a sort of central point maybe where people would get in touch. We had a kind of, I think Peace News used to allow people to kind of have box numbers at their premises or something, and so that's what we did. We had a mailing address at Peace News, and that lasted for a while, but in the end, I think they started worrying about, is the ALF too violent for us? Are we are their kind of tactics really in line with what we believe? And so they kind of, they said they'd no longer accommodate, that we could no longer use them as a mailing address. So that's what happened. But for a while, I think possibly for a number of years, we had an address at Peace News.
Isn't it weird? I suppose it's just a sign of society. But like all those years ago, you doing things specifically to cause certain damage to certain individuals or group that restricted their ability to use animals was seen as like this violent kind of obnoxious behaviour. But in 2024, grown adults smashing up shops to steal iPhones is considered a protest. Like how?
Well,
yes. It's not really a positive sign of the times, is it? Really, we're regressing, if anything.
Yeah, and also if you look at the comparison between the sentences that people received,
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
There's a lot of publicity today about this guy got 3 years for
For assaulting an emergency worker, that one.
It assaulted an emergency worker. He did something else, didn't he?
Yeah. Versus the Just Stop Oil who planned to throw
exactly,
paint at an airport.
All right, their protests might have been a pain in the ass to some people.
But on that note, just very quickly, because I'm glad that came up. So all of these kind of people that for the last 18 months, maybe 2 years now, have been moaning blind daily about Just Stop Oil, saying, why don't they target the oil companies? Why don't they target the people that are doing this? Why do they keep targeting the individuals and stopping people that are just trying to go to work? Do you want to fucking think about that right now? Because that's exactly what you're doing. But instead of disrupting people for 10 minutes because there's some paint on the road, you're destroying their livelihoods. You're destroying their homes. You're destroying their communities, and you're making them feel unsafe. You're the worst people on the planet at the moment.
Well, yeah,
Just think about it.
But we've always had this disparity of sentencing. I mean, you know, in our court case when, the court case in Sheffield in the in sort of mid 1980s, where I received 10 years, given 10 years for, you know, for conspiracy in relation to the
be careful with the language here, Ronnie.
Yeah, and and Roger got 4 years. The same judge that sentenced us, he had his next case, I think, was a rape case, and he gave the guy 4 years for rape.
That's just insanity to me.
He'd given people in our case either more or no less than what he gave to a rapist, and our you know our damage was only to property.
Yeah,
It was aimed at, you know,
which would have been insured
in animals. Yeah, and so, you know, and this has been, but I think what it is that we were seen as more of a threat to the system. A rapist isn't the.
Yeah, no, and I guess they were trying to make an example to stop others from doing this in the future.
And Just Stop Oil are the threat to the system, aren't they? Whereas,
which is exactly what they've done with those sentences. Yeah, I mean, one thug in a city centre being an idiot isn't a threat to the system. You're absolutely right.
They're not a threat to the system.
No, you are absolutely correct. Yeah,
big away. No, and I think that's why this is why there's this. They're more of a threat to ordinary people. But the system to these people in authority, the system is, and the way they want things to be run in order to profit the rich, right? That is more important than individuals. You see, someone as a threat to the system, or the system as they want it to be, is seen as more dangerous than someone whose actions are only a threat to individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. But I suppose that now that we know about the sentences, we might as well backtrack a little bit and talk about how they came about.
I mean, well, the first prison sentence I had was for band of mercy activities prior to the ALF, and that was a 3-year sentence. Myself and another guy got 3 years for a number of. I think I spoke about this in the last show. About how we were arrested and on a breeding place in Oxfordshire that bred animals for the laboratories, and eventually we were sentenced to 3 years in prison.
What was it that inspired, say, like the fur coats in shops and that sort of stuff, as opposed to just something else somewhere else? What was kind of like the inspiration behind that campaign or whatever?
You mean, why was the fur trade the focus of the ALF?
Yeah. Just in terms of like just.
You see, I think that kind of what happened in a sense, and it also happened with, other campaigns, within the animal rights movement, whereby what had happened was, prior to the 1970s. You had these national organisations. We're talking about here in the UK, but I'm sure it's similar in other countries. You had these national organisations that were campaigning on various issues in relation to, to the exploitation and oppression of other animals. There was League Against Cruel Sports. There was a couple of national anti-vivisection organisations. there were organisations campaigning against the fur trade, against zoos and circuses and so on. And basically, what happened in the 1970s when the movement became, that was when the animal rights movement really kind of kicked off. Like the idea of animal rights and all that. That all kind of arose in the 1970s, really. But also you had a lot of people wanting to be active. There's a lot of people wanting to carry out some kind of grassroots activity that was kind of, in a sense, not connected or to the national organisations. But I think the thing is they carried on the same ethos. In other words, the targets of those national organisations, in a sense.
Well, they just did militant versions of single issues. That's all.
They were militant issues, exactly, and more militant. It was more militant in the sense that, the movement became more militant, but it didn't become more radical. Because the real radical, if it had become more radical, then it would have challenged speciesism. It would have promoted veganism. That would have been the main thrust of the movement. That didn't happen. There was really hardly any campaigning for veganism. And there certainly wasn't campaigning for veganism like kind of on the street. There wasn't the street outreach and stuff like that you sometimes get now. And so that's kind of what happened. And so when the campaigns became even more militant and involved direct action, they followed along the same lines. And so people attacked along the lines of these single issues like animal experimentation, the fur trade, hunting, and there were some attacks on the meat industry, but in a sense those were kind of they were like, in a sense, kind of single issue as well, because that they weren't combined with any call on ordinary people to become vegan. It was, once again, the idea was, let's put these places out of business. That was the thrust of it. Although we didn't really, that was kind of smaller. I think we thought that kind of the main focus there, the two main things that the ALF went for was animal experimentation and the fur trade.
The way I would explain it is that and this sounds odd to new vegan eaters, I think, is the fact that we used to argue that flesh consumption would be the last thing to go.
Yes.
So we would concentrate on closing down animal circuses, closing down hunting, even closing down vivisection and the fur trade, this kind of stuff. And then we'll turn our attention to flesh consumption. It was almost like we were in search of the doable and the winnable.
The easier, I
suppose there's practical elements of that as well. I mean, like last week, Ronnie mentioned, how was it, 120 mice that you took back to your house? Well, you couldn't do that with 120 pigs, could you?
Oh no!
Or even 120 chickens.
They could. Where it was strange. Really, where there were like attacks on farms, very often, where they were kind of, the type of animals that are often farmed for human consumption. The farms that were attacked were farms that were supplying these animals for experiments, not for not for food. You see what I mean? Yes. Because there was very much this. I remember, some goats being rescued from a place that was breeding goats to supply the goats to laboratories. For instance.
Yeah, and rabbit farms, because they were breeding for laboratories, but they were breeding for laboratories and for the fur trade, so that was a double target.
It was a double one, you see. So it was very much, and I think that what Roger said is true. That we thought, we'll knock out the easier targets first, and when we've got rid of those industries, then we'll have this all-out attack on the kind of.
I think we were encouraged by the national groups to do that because it gave them their victories. And so there wasn't this overarching kind of holistic view of the movement as it is now with veganism as the baseline. That just didn't exist in those days. And in fact, we've only really just established veganism as a baseline in historical terms, obviously in history in general, but even in the history of the movement. we haven't been at it very long in terms of veganism.
No, that's right. And of course, because if a place closed as a result of ALF activity or where ALF activity played a big part in it, and there were a number of animal breeding centres and obviously fur stores and all that closed. It meant that the national groups could claim some sort of victory and maybe claim that they were somehow kind of involved in the closure of the place. Maybe play down the ALF's aspect of it and sort of celebrate.
So some things haven't changed at all then.
No. But you see, it's kind of these. A lot of these things were like false victories anyway. Because say if you close, they were butcher shops that were attacked many times and would close, but no animals were spared because it just meant that people.
Yeah, they just go somewhere else. Yeah.
And we thought these were magnificent victories. But
well, a famous case of that, of course, is that you've got a farmer who had a dairy herd. They cut down on the dairy herd in order to put a unit for breeding guinea pigs for vivisection. When that got closed down by a campaign, they just expanded their dairy herd.
Yeah, this was the new church guinea pig campaign, and there were people sent to prison in connection with that campaign. It was a very intensive campaign, and it was a campaign that kind of sucked in a lot of the resources.
We were all kind of the idea was to attack the supply side.
It was an attack on supply, and you can. I mean, the thing is, you can have some, I suppose, kind of degree of success with that, but it's very limited.
Well, it has to have a very kind of sophisticated and well-rounded educational aspect to it, and of course that part of it we've already said we neglected because it wasn't that important at the time.
Well, we weren't interested in the ordinary public. It was just a direct war between the ALF and the other groups.
I mean, looking back, if you had the knowledge we have now, everything would be different. Even if, say, we were still going to go and do the ALF type stuff, the educational component of it would become absolutely crucial, whereas it was neglected back then.
I think it would to us. Whether it would be to certain other activists, I'm not sure. I mean, I think direct action can have a very strong educational component, but I'd argue it would need to be you use the direct action as a means of education. So that means that you don't go for it, and you don't need to go for it. In fact, it's probably counterproductive to go for like huge amounts of damage and stuff like that. You're doing some sort of direct action that attracts attention, and then you can use that attention to spread a message to the public. But that was very much the opposite of the type of direct action the ALF carried out. We were going for maximum damage. We didn't care about educating the public. They weren't in the equation.
No, I mean, one thing which is difficult if you're doing the education route is the media, and this was before social media. We have to remember the media get bored really, really quick. The sociologists talk about the exacting criteria of the media, and it's that thing about if it bleeds it leads and all the rest of it, and they get bored really, really quickly. And of course the very famous example of that is Fathers for Justice. They started off by just appearing dressed up as superheroes, getting front pages, and then they ended up having to invade Buckingham Palace to get a little something on page 5,
Yeah, I mean, you don't hear about them at all now, do you?
No, but see but that's what the media do to you. They almost like,
yes.
I remember doing the Waterloo Cup, and in the end, because they were all over us at first, because I used to do the press for that, and we used to get calls from all over the world. The phone was red hot, and in the end, they were going. You'd have to ring them in the end, and they'd go, well, has anybody been arrested? And you say, no. And they say, well, has anybody been injured? And you say, no. And you say, well, ring us back later then, mate.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. I think, very often, even now, with the kind of direct actions that are aimed more at awareness raising, aimed more at, putting out a message, to the ordinary public. And there are groups involved in that type of direct action that you notice.
Ronnie, I want to ask you a tactical question.
Yes.
About the incendiary devices. Now, I don't know whether we need to describe them. The incendiary device, because funny enough, I was called a bomber or something on Facebook again today.
Yeah.
But this is because of something called the incendiary devices. Now, we can talk about that in the sense that it was something that fitted into a 20-pack of cigarettes. And it was based on two firelighters which are lighted and created smoke. So one kind of, I think, mistake we made, Ronnie, is by calling them incendiary devices. We should have called them smoke devices or something, shouldn't we?
Yeah. So to kind of give a little bit of history to this, that this was something that arose in the kind of I suppose it was kind of around about the mid-1980s. And
85, 86 started.
Yeah, there'd been an ongoing campaign. I mean, like I said, the really kind of probably main targets of the ALF were animal experimentation and the fur trade. And prior to the sort of mid-80s, the sort of main actions against the fur trade would be like smashing the windows of fur shops, because at the time there were fur shops everywhere. Every town had a fur shop, and every suburb of like big cities had a fur shop. They're everywhere.
Yeah, I've got a funny story about that. Just to cut across you there, Ronnie, is that fact when the fur shop started to employ those roller shutters, which was new at the time, I remember going to a crossbow shop because we were experimenting with the idea of being able to punch holes through it with a crossbow, right? Because obviously the usual thing about a catapult just didn't work against the roller blinds.
Yeah. Oh yes, and one thing people would do when they employed the roller blinds, because other places would do that too. I mean, you'd get that on gun shops, and you'd get it on butcher shops. Started doing it, and as a result of attacks from the ALF, or they're worried that they might be attacked. That what we used to do is glue the locks up, maybe put tacks in the lock so they couldn't unlock the roller blinds. And all right, they got round that, but it was just something to kind of a way that you could do something, actually do something about it. And basically, there were. I remember there were some action. I remember Harrods in. There's a group of animal activists in the. I think that might have been late 1970s. And they would regularly organise occupations of the fur department in Harrods, where a load of us would charge into the fur department in Harrods, and and we'd sit down all over the place with banners, and we'd be chanting and everything. And it would close. They'd have to close the fur department, and security guards would come and try and throw us out and all that kind of thing. So that was because that was the other big aspect at the time of the fur trade, that department stores all over the country, many of them had a fur department, you see, and so there was a way of attacking the fur shops. But what would you do about the fur departments in department stores? I suppose you could just throw a brick through the main window in the department store or something like that in protest against them having a fur department. I think that did happen sometimes. But what happened was there were a group of people in Sheffield, and they came up with this idea of like creating this device that would start a small fire. And the idea was to kind of really place these in department stores, not in the fur department. Usually it would be in the furniture department, because there's kind of probably more stuff to burn in the furniture department. But they never considered that anywhere would burn down, because what the idea was that the device would create a small fire, and the smoke from the fire would set off the sprinkler system, and so the store would be damaged by water. The idea was to cause water damage to stores, you see.
Yeah, well, I think again, you see, in some ways we overemphasise the fire bit, because obviously all the furniture had kind of fire retardant.
Yeah, it was smoke. They wanted to really
so I mean, really, although the actual thing did alight, it was just based on 2 firelighters, and it lasted for as long as 2 firelighters would normally last. Okay, and there wasn't anything else. I mean, there wasn't loads of paper and everything else to ignite. It was just mainly a little bit of cardboard and 2 firelighters. And so it was based really on creating smouldering smoke, which would rise up to the sprinkler systems, right?
Absolutely. And what happened was they kind of made the mistake, in the sense, the people that kind of that invented the device, this group of activists in Sheffield, they made the mistake of kind of sort of shitting on their own doorstep, because the first action they carried out was in their own city against Rackham's, the department store in Sheffield that had a fur department. And indeed, that's exactly what happened with Rackham's in Sheffield. The store was damaged by water. There was hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of damage was caused to the store through water damage, because they set off the sprinkler system. See? So that went exactly according to plan. And then then what happened? Because I was a press officer at the time, and I received this phone call asking me could I go to Sheffield and meet some people at the station at a particular time, because there was something important they needed to tell me, and all this. So that's what I did. It was very mysterious. I didn't have an idea.
I'll do the music then. Ding 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 ding.
Yeah, it was. It kind of was. So I thought, well, okay, I'll kind of, I'll do that, And so I got off the train, and there was someone there to meet me, and obviously recognised me and said, look, I need you to come with me, and took me to a flat in Sheffield where there were other people, and they said the reason why, and they had one of these devices on the table, and actually it was even smaller than the one you described, because it was a packet of 10 cigarettes. It was like, smaller.
Oh, so one firelighter.
Well, I think it probably was. Yeah, I think they. You could use either 10 or a 20, but this one was like a packet.
Yeah, and why was it always the players' ones that they went for? Do you know?
I kind of don't. I kind of don't know. I mean, I can't remember what this one was. What brand? It may be probably whatever cigarette they preferred to smoke, if any of them smoked. But there was a watch. There was a watch face in there. This would obviously be like a wind up watch face, and that was all part of the timing device and everything. It was all very intricately made, to fit in such a small space. And they said the reason why we've got you to come here is that we're going to start this campaign using these devices. This was before anything had ever happened. This was before the Rackhams, the attack on Rackhams. They said we're going to start doing this. So we want, because you're the press officer, we want you to tell you, so that when you start getting calls from the media, you know what they're talking about, if you see what I mean. And so I thought, right, fine, okay, I know now. And and then I went back, went back to London. And then I think a couple of weeks later, there was the attack on Rackham's. And then this started spreading elsewhere. Either that group of people went to other cities, or kind of what happened was there was this diagram of how to make these devices was created. And as I explained earlier, it was just mailed out everywhere throughout the animal rights movement. People were just getting these things through the door about, like, you can make one of these and go to your local department store that's got like a fur department and plant it in the department store.
Well, I bet Jean Pink loved that.
No, she would have been delighted. I don't know whether she received one. I doubt if she did anything with it. Gene Pink was the founder of Animal Aid. For anyone that wasn't listening to our previous our previous show, and that's what happened to other people took up the ideas. People started making these things. But what the problem was that kind of, because it's based on the fact of like causing water damage, but there were some of these department stores that hadn't maintained their sprinkler systems, and so instead of there being water damage, it ended up with a huge fire erupting. And some of these, there were a small number of stores that were actually kind of destroyed by fire, weren't they? Like Dingles.
Well, the famous one was Dingles in Plymouth.
Dingles in Plymouth, but there were others as well, because these people didn't, they hadn't maintained the sprinkler systems.
Yeah, but I always say there, I mean, like we said last week that the ALF have got a non-violence policy, and it goes to extraordinary lengths not to harm, other animals or human animals. But I always claim that probably saved human lives, or at least potential to do that.
I mean, the devices were timed to go off in the early hours of the morning when there'd be nobody in the store. I mean, possibly there might have been, some security there, but really, no members of the public there. And in any event, it wasn't felt that a security guard would be in danger because, of course, the kind of thinking was that the sprinklers would go off.
Yeah, but say there was another fire in that store, totally unconnected to the ALF, during the day when it was full of hundreds of people.
Yeah. The ones that didn't maintain their sprinkler system, people could quite likely have been killed. So it kind of revealed faults in the sprinkler system, which probably, sort of ironically, could have saved people's lives, because they would have to kind of properly, all these stores would then have to look into their sprinkler system and sort of make sure, we need to kind of make sure our sprinkler system's working properly in case someone...
Which is probably the law that they should anyway in the first place.
It was the law. It's just that, once again, it's like they don't want to spend the money. They probably think it's extremely unlikely that a fire's going to happen, so we won't bother. We won't spend money maintaining the sprinkler system. That would have been why it was. And so, but then all of a sudden, loads of stores probably thought, shit, we're going to have to kind of properly update our sprinkler system in case someone comes and puts one of these devices.
They'd have to have one of those regulators. They call it off sprinkler or something, don't they?
Off sprinkler, yeah. So that campaign resulted in loads of department stores getting rid of fur departments, not just stores that were attacked, but kind of stores in general, because they thought it's not worth it. The amount of like profit we make from the fur department isn't worth the risk of having the store destroyed or the store badly damaged, or so it resulted in.
But it does kind of reveal the speciesism, though, doesn't it? I mean, like,
yes.
None of the leather departments were
touched.
None of the butcheries were touched. None of the wool parts were touched.
There were attacks on butcher shops. There were attacks on shops selling leather, but that wasn't really a main focus of the. I mean, butcher shops, you could be walking along. I'd be walking along the road. I'd see a butcher shop. I'd go and get a brick, throw it through the window and run off, because you couldn't do it now. You'd be caught on CCTV. There wasn't CCTV. So butcher shops were like attacked in that kind of way, that kind of sort of spontaneous way. But there wasn't this kind of campaign like there was against the fur industry. And the same with leather shops. I'd have done the same if I'd seen a leather shop, just throw the brick through, but it was that sort of level. But there wasn't sort of campaign against all world of leather stores or anything like that. No.
Well, so Andy, we've done it now. Should we carry on or what?
You can do it. I mean, I've been kind of monitoring the chat and I haven't seen any questions yet, and I've only really got one. So feel free to carry on if you want to. I didn't want to interrupt. I'm only on mute because the dog's snoring.
But you see, I mentioned either last time or the time before, this speciesism. In other words, like, when we talk about speciesism, we're normally referring to, humans being preferred over other animals, or humans being, seen as superior, viewed as superior to other animals, and but it can be between different species of animals. It can be us regarding one species of sentient animal as more important than another. And right back in the early days of the Band of Mercy, that occurred with the attack on the seal hunting boats. A couple of us attacked 2 seal hunting boats on the Wash that these local fishermen used and they used them as sort of motherships from which to launch inflatables to go on the sandbanks and kill baby seals. You see, so because of that, we attacked the 2 boats they used, 2 fishing boats they used, and put them out of action. But why didn't we attack them to stop the guys from going fishing? Because that's just as bad, isn't it, as killing the baby seals? But
because
that was speciesism, right? Considering, in a sense, that the seals were more important than the fishes. But once again, you see, we were following on in the footsteps of previous campaigns, because there was an anti-fur campaign. The hunt saboteurs had tried previously to disrupt that particular killing of seals. So we just carried on with what other groups were doing without kind of thinking about. And no one was campaigning for the fishes at the time. There was no sort of campaign against the fishing industry or anything like that. So we just didn't think of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that potentially still happens today. I mean, people potentially either join or replicate the wording or the actions of the movement that they join. So if no one else around you was saying, well, hang on a minute, why aren't you looking at the fish? Why wouldn't you do anything but follow suit?
Exactly, yeah, and that's what, I think that's what happened, and I think that's why there was so little or no attention to vegan education, because we just followed on doing what these national single issue campaigns had been doing for, well, they'd been doing that for decades before the 70s, and we just made that more militant, really.
Yeah, and I mean, essentially, that's pretty much what we're talking about now with the movement and stuff, isn't it? People come into the movement, and this is the information that they get given, and all they might do is be a little bit more radical with their welfareism. But that's what they're surrounded by, that's what they're introduced to, and until someone comes along one day and says something different.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we were just, we kind of thought, well, all these campaigns by these national organisations aren't getting anywhere, so we need to up the ante, carry on with the same campaign, but just up the ante, do some direct action, and do more protests and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a real symbiosis at the time. I remember one of the BUAV AGMs where John Page was talking about, how the ALF kind of acts as a kind of spear and kind of bursts through something, and all the rest of the movement then can follow through. And so I think there was that kind of feeling about it, that the direct action was almost like for itself, but it was also in service of the general movement. And I think that's why the BUAV covered the ALF so favourably at the beginning. Of course, everything kind of. I mean, what did that last for 2 or 3 years when you were?
Yeah, I mean, the BUAV didn't really like. They didn't like the damage action. So the animal rescue, where there was, quite often had photos taken of, people carrying rescued animals and.
Yeah, but they were just like all the other media. I mean, like obviously, if you got pictures of somebody coming out of a lab with a beagle, compared with a picture of a lorry that has kind of been burnt out, which one is more appealing? It's obvious, isn't it?
Well, yes. So they kind of they sort of used the ALF for that side of the ALF's activities. They kind of they'd be frequently in. I think in Liberator, the BUAV's newspaper, there were quite very often images of animals being rescued, or rescued animals afterwards.
I think you featured quite a lot as well in the Liberator. I remember an article you wrote in the Liberator. I think it's the Liberator. It was when it went to the tabloid type, because
Yes.
Kim Stallwood kind of modelled it on the Daily Mirror, and I remember a kind of article that you wrote where you were encouraging people to check for nesting birds.
Oh yes, yeah. When in buildings, if they were going to kind of go and burn a place down. I mean, now of course that's the risk of to me that would be just a total no go now, because just checking for nesting birds isn't enough. You can't.
I was always concerned about the film Behind the Mask. There's a claim in that the activists would go back time and time again to make sure that the building was empty. Well, first of all, doesn't matter how many times they go back, they can't ensure that the building is empty anyway.
Yep.
Yes.
Also, the more times you go back, the more of a security risk it is, and so it just doesn't kind of happen that way.
No, not
and so I think that's why arson became controversial. And of course, you've got some people who don't think that deeply. I mean, I put that once to Gary Yourofsky during an interview that arson is a problem, and of course he couldn't see it because he was always in favour of the most the most useless of the actions, and but he was just saying, I don't know what you mean by there's no such thing as an empty building. I said, well, it's obvious, isn't it? But, I mean, you can't even get an empty car. I mean, I've never had a car without several spiders living in the.
No, absolutely. I think there's loads in our car.
Yeah, and so the idea that you can have an empty building like a broiler unit, which is a massive kind of shed, and there's mice and rats and moths and nesting birds and
they'll kind of be all sorts. I mean, it was very rare that I think I know one occasion where some empty broiler sheds were set fire to, but I mean normally with broilers it was more often with the battery hens really, and that would what we did then was normally rescue rather than damage. And if any damage was done, it might be to the tractor belonging to the farm or something like that. But I mean, you're absolutely right. But I don't know to what extent we considered insects in those days. Really, I think there's more and more evidence now. That insects are sentient, isn't there? Like there's, there was.
Well, you wouldn't have been a true vegan, Ronnie, if you didn't not care about insects, according to most people. So you were just being consistent.
Yes, I think we just thought.
But no, it's a very interesting point that there isn't really such a thing as an empty building, is there? I mean, right now in buildings that are occupied, they're still occupied by others, whether you see them all the time or not. Let alone empty buildings. If anything, an empty building is more likely to be occupied by others.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
I mean, just think of what's going on in Palestine. They kind of go, okay, population, move out. And then we'll blow the fuck out of your buildings, kind of thing. But of course they're never unoccupied.
No, and with that with the attacks on Palestine, I mean, appalling for the people that live there. But the main victims of that are our fellow animals, aren't they?
Absolutely. Well, that kind of brings on to my question was actually going back to some of the policies again, but in the comments it's a question what you both think about intersectionality, but I can ask my question as well because it's sort of linked. So going back to like when you were writing those policies and thinking about how these particular devices or any form of like sabotage might have affected other humans, was that like personal, individual kind of like natural respect? Or are we talking like this was something that you believed was kind of like vegan philosophy even then? Was this just kind of like individual, well, we don't want to cause harm to humans, but some people would? Or was it kind of across the board that didn't happen?
Well, I think there were people with different views involved in the ALF. I mean, there were people who were kind of pacifists. Who, I mean, at one time I was, and I'm not now, but I was at the time, and so there'd be a principle of not just not wanting to to harm to harm humans.
Yeah, you went from pacifist to pacifist over here, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
That's good. Very good.
Well, I'd still regard myself as an anti-militarist, but that isn't the same as a pacifist. I mean, obviously that's a different topic with discussion. But there were but I came to a position that it was it was the best tactical position to adopt, because if the ALF had started becoming violent towards humans, then the type of prisons, the length of prison sentence that would attract would be far greater, and also the number of people we would be able to attract as activists would be far less. You see, so it would have been a huge tactical error for the ALF to embark on a campaign of violence against humans.
Clarify this then, Ronnie. The policy was important for the rest of the movement to know, or for potential recruits to know?
It was definitely important for potential recruits to know. I think it was important for the rest of the movement to know kind of anyway that we'd certainly we'd had far less sympathy from the rest of the movement, I think, if we started being violent.
Yeah, but it just underlines the fact that, again, we were very kind of undeveloped when it came to the press, because if we'd have taken that seriously, we would have emphasized that a lot more when we talked to the press than we did, and also, extended that to talking about even with the incendiaries about, well, actually this is to create smoke. We would really focus on those kind of points to make sure that they understood that we cared about. Yeah. And we kind of didn't do it, did we, really?
Well, they were kind of only talked about in response to questions from the media. In other words, if the media phoned me up and say, well, isn't this going to kill people, what you're doing? And then I'd have to explain, well, no, because people take these measures to make sure that doesn't happen. So it was, I'd be, instead of kind of issuing that as part of a press release, I'd be saying that in response to questions by them.
How did it come about when you ended up with, obviously, something like the Animal Rights Militia? And these were people who didn't agree with the non-violence policy. So how was that negotiated, that they would, or did it just was obvious that they should therefore come up with a different name? Or did you have to actually say to people, oi, or what?
No. I think it was like widely understood what the policy, widely understood, and I think widely respected, the ALF policy. So I think when there were people that wanted to become, that kind of didn't want to rule out violence towards humans. And I'm not talking about violence towards members of the public, but violence towards people that were involved in the oppression of other animals.
So there was like three groups, wasn't there? There was the Animal Rights Militia, there was the Hunt Retribution Squad, and there was something called the Justice Department.
Justice Department, and there might have been even others as well. But you see, none of those groups hardly did anything at all. A lot of it was posturing, where there'd be photographs of a group of them all,
with chainsaws and all that kind of stuff.
Wearing ski masks and chainsaws and hammers and that, or whatever, baseball bats and things.
Yeah, it was a bit too macho for me. It's a bit macho, wasn't it?
Well, I thought it was posturing, because they didn't ever do any actions. None of these things.
I remember writing an article. I think you might have published it for me, but I remember writing an article because it struck me that the Animal Rights Militia was speciesist, because they were saying that if Barry Horn died of a hunger strike, they would kill 10 vivisectors. And I thought, well, why would you have to wait for a human to die?
I know. Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah, there was. Yeah, there kind of was that. And obviously, as the ALF press officer, I'd be questioned about these groups. what are they kind of, do they have any connection with the ALF, and what did I think of them, And
And
I kind
do
of,
you think you differentiated the ALF from them well enough?
well, I kind of hope so. I certainly tried to, but
I mean, I think it got a bit more messy with Robin Webb, didn't it? But with you.
Yes, I mean, but you see, then they'd say, "Would you condemn these people?" They always want me to condemn things. I said, well, look, and I'd say I didn't want to use that word. I'd say, well, look, this isn't, our policy.
You should say yes. I totally condemn vivisectors and farmers.
Well,
and,
yes, you see, I would kind of do that sort of thing. I'd say, well, we got to remember, even though, there are people that won't agree with these tactics. What you got to remember is the real violent people are the ones that are doing these things to the to the other animals.
I always
would
found
turn
the
it that
best
way.
way to deal with the condemnation thing is say, well, I'll definitely condemn vivisectors and I'll condemn butchers and all that. And he said, no, well, that's not why I'm asking. I said, well, I'll condemn who I want to condemn, and you condemn.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically, they ask a question, and then you say what you want to say, which I kind of still
going
do.
Back
Anyway.
to the the intersectionality question. So back in say like the early days of the Band of Mercy and ALF and stuff like that, would racists have been accepted?
Well, you see, the thing is with not so much with Band of Mercy, because with the Band of Mercy there's only 6 of us.
Yeah, and so, I guess you were quite friendly with those people. Yeah,
there was just one Band of Mercy cell, really. That was all, and there's 6 of us, and none of us were racist.
And you had the Mein Kampf reading group. I remember.
That's right. And the Mussolini fan club.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm asking is, even back then, was it kind of established as an idea that there's some sort of conflict between opposing one injustice and yet perpetuating another?
Well, it was more obvious, wasn't it, that we just took it for granted almost. I
kind of think so.
That's the impression that I've got all these times that you've been talking about this kind of stuff. I just got that impression throughout, that it was just kind of like, well, yeah, this was never in question.
That's it. You see, but moving on to the ALF, because the ALF was like, was much more expansive than the Band of Mercy. There was lots and lots of local ALF groups. It's hard for me to say, what happened in any other groups apart from groups that I kind of worked with. I mean, certainly in groups that I worked with within the ALF, there was no, everyone in those groups was kind of anti-racist, but that was just the people they were. That was just, part of kind of opposing oppression. These people that opposed to oppression and exploitation, and and particularly focused on the oppression and exploitation of other animals by humans, because that is kind of like so massively horrendous. But we were just all sort of naturally opposed to all of it, and so we'd be opposed to the oppression and exploitation of one group of humans by another group as well. Yeah. We were just.
Yeah, you definitely do get that impression listening to it. Whereas now you kind of have to be specific, don't you? And you get a lot of counter and opposition to this.
That's right. Yeah, but you're kind of talking about. We were people that, in a sense, were kind of separate from ordinary society. We were, because of the type of actions we were taken, we kind of, in a sense, existed outside of ordinary society. Obviously, we had to kind of have some interaction with ordinary society, because we kind of had to go to the shops, and we had to, we kind of had to have somewhat interaction with ordinary society. But to a very large extent, we were outside of ordinary society, and so we kind of, we sort of didn't take on, we had our kind of own values, in a sense, that were very, very set against all forms of oppression, I'd say, really. Whereas I think that's kind of what happens now, is that you've got, it's very, very different now. I mean, that sort of direct action hardly ever happens at all now. I mean, there are some ALF actions, but it's very, very much diminished, for various reasons. And so kind of what you're kind of really talking about now in terms of, people having unsavory views in terms of some other humans, you're kind of more talking about the vegan community. You're not talking about people that are necessarily activists. And some of them might be activists in outreach perhaps, or something like that.
Yeah, but I think, Ronnie, that all the people even who weren't into direct action, they would still be. I mean, we're into Steve Best territory here. Everybody was kind of left leaning to.
They kind of were, yeah. Yes.
It was just kind of a given. I mean, it's like now, with Palestine, everybody would just assume that everybody, who is an animal advocate would be on one particular side.
Yes, no, I think that's
against bombing the shit out of babies, that kind of stuff.
But I think what kind of happened is, I think one of the problems now is that. Back then we reached a stage where, people involved in, the national organisations, even, say like the BAV, that almost everyone involved in those organisations actually was vegan, even though we didn't campaign for veganism. The people themselves were vegan, even though they're, campaigning on single issues. And what we've got now is a situation where, like, we've got, a lot more people that call themselves vegan. Most of those people aren't activists, and I think basically we sort of lived as activists. That's who we were.
Yeah.
Whether we were people involved in direct action or whether we were people involved in, one of the organisations. That was kind of our life. That was just, almost the totality of our life. Whereas I think now what happens is, like, veganism for a lot of people, or living as a vegan, or what they consider to be living as a vegan, it's like an add-on to their,
I think that kind of the way you were describing that is perfect. Yeah, I know, I totally agree. I would say the modern day movement now, they wake up as the people that they are, and they put a vegan T-shirt on when it suits.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what happens is that these people, because a lot of people in society, ordinary people in society, are racist, are homophobic, are transphobic. That's kind of who they are, right? And then what happens is they find out about kind of what happens to other animals. They don't like it, right? And they think, right, well, I don't like that. I'm not going to consume animal products anymore. I'm going to kind of become vegan, or what I think is vegan. And that's kind of like really, really, really easy to do. It's like really, really easy to live as a vegan. You can eat something that looks exactly the same as what you ate before, except that it's vegan friendly. It doesn't contain animal products, and I think because it's so easy to kind of do that now, people can just say, right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to swap that for that and that for that. There's these few things I used to. I'm not
but that isn't vegan, as we know.
It's not, no, but they think it is, and then they carry on exactly the same as before with all the other views that they had before, and they've just it's just an add-on. They've kind of just their veganism is just an add-on. It's not. They're not. That's not their whole life. They're not living as a vegan.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one aspect that occurred to me, which is interesting in this thing, is that I didn't know anybody, because it was football hooliganism was big around the 70s and all, but I didn't know anybody involved with that, because our violence, and we could argue about whether it was violence at all, but that was mindless violence in our eyes, whereas we were into mindful violence, if you wanted to call it violence at all, right?
Well, it was a violence of resistance. So it was, it was the action of resistance. I mean, we wouldn't have called what we were doing violence, because the harm was done to property rather than to sentient beings. And so we didn't regard it as violence, even though some people did. But yes, I mean, it was about liberation. It was about freeing others from tyranny. It wasn't it was, as far away from being mindless as you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
That's what I suppose. When you think about it, it's kind of hard to get a kind of grip of how things have slid away from us in a way. Because, I mean, speaking personally, I used to regard, animal advocates were kind of my brothers and sisters, and they seemed very close to me, and they seemed to be kind of my people and this kind of stuff. And I've got to admit that I'm not necessarily feeling that about the movement now. Really? Because you've got all this thing, and of course, as we know, even social movement theory explains this by saying that when a movement does get bigger and takes off, you get a big influx of people who don't necessarily have the same values of the founders. And that is exactly what has happened with the vegan movement.
Yeah, you understand like diversity, right? So in the same way that, let's just say we're both vegan, but in your spare time you enjoy listening to 60s music, and in my spare time I like going ice skating. Those two things are cool. But like if your spare time you enjoy going on KKK rallies, and in my spare time I enjoy trolling trans people on the internet, then these are some contradictions with our philosophy.
The problem there, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and this is the part that seems to be getting forgotten. Like when fellow vegans act like bigots, we want to distance ourselves from them in the same way that they want to distance themselves from non-vegans.
Well, I always go back, as you know, to Steve Best's Total Liberation talk from 2013 in Luxembourg, and he comes up with a kind of list. Now, I don't know whether, in fact, I mean, I know people on the right don't accept this list, but when you look at it, it seems to be relevant to me in the sense that left-leaning people tend to be kind of more in favour of things like democracy, rights, equality, all those kind of things. Right-leaning people tend to be into things like borders and military and all that kind of stuff. Even family, as in patriarchal family, that means. And so, I mean, just look at things like Trump. Borders, warfare. Kind of military conquest, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
These are not
build a wall, keep them out. Yeah.
Yeah, these are not the things that we're into. Even if you look now at the riots going on about immigration, people in the movement would be much more open to kind of let them come, or sort out inequality. We need to sort out global inequality, because that's the reason we've got migrants.
Yeah, well, they got migrants because, of course, the countries that they that they come from have been deprived
by us. We've gone over there.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've followed us back because we've got all their stuff and we don't like it.
Absolutely. What a huge part of this equation that never gets talked about is the fact that huge amounts of these people come here because they were promised that if you get here, we will sort you out, we will hook you up, we will repay you for the damage that we caused to your economy, to your politics, to whatever. That's the promise that they're given, and then when they get here, the UK citizens berate them. I suppose it's the same.
And then you've got the other issue, which a lot of people are talking about, certainly on things like TikTok and stuff, is the fact that from the ruling class point of view, to use that terminology, it's very convenient for the people with nothing to be fighting against each other.
Yes. I mean, it's like the real enemies are the ones in the yachts, not the ones in the little boats coming across the channel. This is the problem. There's plenty. This country, in terms of material things and everything. We're the UK is one of the richest countries in the world. It's just that the distribution of that is all wrong. It's just that these things are concentrated in the hands of the rich, and there's plenty to go round. There's plenty to go round if it was properly shared out to look after everyone, including all those people that want to come here out of desperation. And that's the problem. That's the problem. It's the rich need to be taxed in order to look after everyone, but governments don't want to do that. And who are the media moguls that spread all this disinformation? They're the rich, aren't they? They're members of the wealthy class. So it all suits all of them to blame desperate people coming from another country for all the problems of society, isn't it? so people don't realise that they're the problem and do something about them. No, and this is yeah.
I've always had this thing, that people have talked about a global village for years and years and years. I've always wished that we actually had that mindset where we regarded everyone on the planet Earth. It's a little bit. Neil Lee, you mentioned Neil Lee before.
Yes,
and he was a big Star Trek fan, not because of the kind of hierarchy and all that, but he liked the idea of humanity coming together under one flag kind of thing and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And that's the way that we could see it. And so somebody who is starving, and like we know that, thousands of children will starved in the last 24 hours.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, if they were in our village, we might do something about it. Although the counterpoint to that is the fact that we walk around our cities and villages and we can step over the starving and the hungry and the poor. So that's the problem. The fact that we're not as nice as we think we are.
I mean the fact that anyone is forced to sleep on the street is just a massive indictment of our society.
And what do we do about it? We get the council coming along, putting those fucking spikes.
Yes, of course. And I mean, once again, and I'm going to come back to this, that like the true ethics of veganism is opposition to all oppression, to opposition of all exploitation. Okay, we're mainly focused on the other animals because they're by far. Yeah,
but again, with the animal thing, what is our solution to pigeons landing on our ledges? Is we put those spikes again?
Exactly spikes. Yeah,
it's the same thing.
The ultimate solution to that is we need to have, we need to create, a society that's, liberation in its, in its culture, that's opposed to, all oppression and exploitation. And the only way we're going to do that is by educating far more people to become vegan, according to what veganism kind of really means, which means that we've got to spread that message as well. That's the only way we'll do it, because how are we going to change the culture? How are we going to change the politics unless we do that? And of course, one of the problems we face, as I always say, is that so few vegans are actually involved in that process or involved in that education. Because it's only vegans that can do it. It's only those of us that believe that already that can then spread that message, isn't it?
Yeah, well, so, maybe not get diverted into arguing with the RSPCA then.
Well, no, exactly. You see, I think this is the main, the main concern I have about that campaign. It's diversionary, that loads of resources are being, because the fact that the RSPCA, gives its assured label to some of these horrendous farms. Now, I don't think the RSPCA should be doing that at all, but that isn't the reason why people...
Yeah, but Ronnie, what would happen if they stopped doing that? Nothing.
If the RSPCA stopped doing that, then you'd still get farms that were certified.
I think there seems to be an idea within the vegan community that if the RSPCA stopped doing their welfare assured labels, loads of people are going to go vegan. I don't know where they're getting that from.
No, that isn't going to happen, because the reason people consume animal products isn't because the RSPCA...
Let's look at it this way. How many years now have tobacco products had the packaging with the photographs and the warning?
Oh, many years now.
So if tomorrow they changed that law and fags went back to having the original kind of like silver or gold or whatever branding it was, do you think millions and millions of people would start smoking again?
No, I don't.
That's the answer to the question of whether the labelling will make any difference to the mindset. Then,
but you see, I think
that's a highly addictive product, and nobody would care. So why do we think the labelling of something else would make any difference to the mindset overall?
No, I don't. I think any difference it would make would be very minor, and so a massive load of resources of vegan campaigners. Because you see, the thing is that this kind of two issues really. I've said that is a problem that the vast majority of vegans don't campaign for veganism. That they're not activists in any way, and I think that's a real problem. But the secondary problem is because the number of activists we've got is so small. It's really important that the activism that's done is as effective and efficient as possible in moving us towards what I've described as an animal liberation society. And so it is important that those resources are used in the best way. And I don't think this RSPCA campaign is the best use of resources. That would be far better used on just vegan outreach, just educating ordinary people to become vegan.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, we talked about earlier how, like, once upon a time, I suppose you looked for maximum damage because you didn't think about the education part. Well, the problem is now they get some really great opportunities with their small amounts of damage in terms of the media coverage it gets. Like, look at that Prince Charles portrait. And then the messaging is pathetic when they do get. So that's the problem. Even with education in mind, it's so weak.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, this is animal. I mean, there are various groups involved in this RSPCA campaign, and they vary in the messaging varies. Does vary a bit. I think Animal Justice Project do encourage people to become, ordinary people to become vegan. So Animal Rising, who are probably the main players in it now, they certainly don't. In fact, ideologically, they're opposed to doing so. You see, so they waste a golden opportunity when they get this publicity to put a message out to ordinary people to become vegan. They won't say it. They're actually against saying it, and that's a huge, that's a huge waste of a golden opportunity. For outreach. I think that's kind of such a shame.
Yeah,
such a shame that they have that attitude. But I think
that's a perfect example of kind of what we were talking about earlier, though. So, like, look at some of the kind of, I don't know, I suppose activities that Animal Rising have been involved in, especially the ones last year with the racing and the dairy protests and that kind of stuff. They got a lot of publicity, and they also got quite a lot of people, whether they were vegan or not, that were all like, yeah, actually, they've got a point here. So what was the claims making that they were reading? We want a plant-based future. So if those people do come into our movement, what mentality are they coming into our movement with? A very much plant-based, welfarist one where we don't talk about veganism at any point.
I'm not sure to what extent their claims making or their messaging would encourage people to come into the movement.
Well, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. But if it was successful, then they're only going to repeat what they've learned, which is obviously problematic within itself.
Yes, I think that's right. And I don't know what we do about it. I mean, I've kind of, we've raised this issue many times about, what the problems are.
The three of us, there's nothing that we can do about it other than potentially talk about it and do what we continue to do now. It's just food for thought for other people that might be somewhat involved with some of these organisations or something else to actually just have a think about those things and think, well, why don't they do that? You would, wouldn't you? Yeah, you absolutely would. So why aren't the group that you're volunteering for or giving out leaflets for or donating to, why don't they promote what you're promoting? Something to think about.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think the word, I always think the word unless is really important, because I think, if we are ever going to achieve a situation where we have, where we have a culture in society and then therefore that then leads on to affect politics and to affect economics as well. The culture that is, opposed to oppression and exploitation, and we're obviously the main beneficiaries of that are going to be other animals because, they're the ones that suffer most from, that attitude from this, from supremacism. Because what we're talking about is, the fundamental problem of supremacism, where you've got one group thinks they're superior to another group, and so can use and exploit and oppress the other group. And obviously, we have various groups in human society where that happens. But the biggest area where it happens is humans. Humans regard themselves as superior to other animals and everything that flows from that. right? We get a society that, we want a culture that opposes all of that. Like the only way you're going to get that is by changing a really substantial number of ordinary people, change their attitudes, right? To change their mindset, to change their behaviour.
Absolutely.
The only way we do that is to have widespread vegan education. The only people that can do that are vegans. Like, unless that happens, we are only ever going to get the most minor of reforms, generally very small welfarist reforms that we squeeze out of reluctant governments. That's all we're ever going to get, unless we make that really radical change in society, which only vegans can make. And this is why it's so important that we have this kind of, this mobilization, let's say mobilization of the vegan community to do that. And so that needs to be the forefront of everyone's mind, and so where people are kind of, spending energies on campaigns that don't involve that or don't include that, that's a very sad, misuse of that energy and misuse of those resources.
Yeah, but Ronnie, isn't there a possibility that a lot of the vegans you're talking about are actually welfarists?
Well, I think, you see, I think the problem is, and I think it's a little bit complicated, is that if you sort of asked one of those people, are you totally opposed to the use of other animals by humans? I think most of them would say, well, yes, I am. It's just
that's a good question. Why they always talk about factory farming, for example, and that kind of...
because I think what's happened is the same as happened with us back in the day. They're just carrying on repeating what's already being said.
Yeah, it's natural contagion at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So they're not.
Well, it's a bit deeper than that. It's socialization. So like everybody is born into cultural speciesism, which means that we're socialized as animal welfarists. I mean, that's the default position of most people as animal welfarists. Everybody agrees. Don't be cruel and all that kind of stuff, right? And then, but when you come into the movement, you get another dose then of socialization, which is all the claims making that exists already. And so that's what you're saying, Andy. That's the thing that people are just almost like given a script, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's why we're seeing the bigotry and the right wing come into the movement as well, because it doesn't conflict with that idea in any way, shape or form, does it? You are opposed to quote unquote animal abuse. So you stop paying for those things. You stop contributing to those things. It's very easy for you to just suddenly put that consistent welfare attitude that you had as a non-vegan into practice, and nothing else about you changed.
Yeah, you've just kind of expanded that a bit, haven't you? You've just kind of, you've just, that welfarist attitude that people had to other animals.
Yeah, you're just basically putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak. That's what you're doing. You've always kind of held these views that that's cruel and that's that's unfair or that's animal abuse. And now what you're doing is you've recognised that and you're no longer contributing to those things. But your speciesism, right, for example, your internal speciesism or that whatever it is, you've brought that with you into veganism because it's never been addressed.
It's what I call residual speciesism.
Mm-hmm.
You remember when we were talking about compassionate world farming last week? I raised the question about how many of the activists and whatever category you want to call it within the movement, how many would think job done if factory farming was to end or something like that? Because I fear that there's a lot more than we would like to think.
I think those people would continue kind of refraining from consuming animal products themselves, even if those products didn't come from factory farms. But
I know that, but I'm not quite sure they'd kind of like be out there on the street, kind of.
Oh no, I don't. I think a lot would. There would be a reduction in. I mean, we don't have.
You free range eaters, come over here and listen to this. It's not going to be the same, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what happened to a group like AV if they abolished factory farming. Because they'd have to change all of their outlook to their language, or they'd go home.
Say AV could only show, the best of the best in terms of animal agriculture and stuff like that. how would that change them?
Well, they'd have to address their language to suit. Otherwise, they'd be going, look at all this animal abuse. And people would be going, well, where?
It's interesting because you see, a lot of these groups are like, they're kind of messaging and their campaigning and everything is kind of very confused, because if you go on the AV website, the first thing you see is on their page is against human supremacism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very radical statement, very radical position. But to what extent is that kind of followed through? What extent is that mirrored in their other messaging and what they show to people? Because that human supremacism, that means you just don't exploit other animals in any way whatsoever, whether it's factory farming, whether it's extensive farming, or
I've always had a problem, as you know, and stop me if I'm repeating here, but you remember I always talk about this book where you've got this woman with a sign about the fur trade, and she's got a picture of one of our fellow animals in a trap, and the sign is, need we say more, or something like that, right? And the problem is that our answer to kind of, if somebody came up and said, well, yeah, tell me more, what's wrong with that? She'd go, look. And they go, yeah, okay, I can see, but tell me what's wrong with it. And she'd go, look. And I think there's like an element now in the movement where we just kind of like get people to look at screens as though that then is the answer and the full...
I think maybe the idea is that, like, kind of people don't think at all about where those things come from, and like if they're kind of consuming animal products, they don't kind of really think about the process by which those products came into being. And I suppose it's the same with fur, although that's very much
but I mean, do you hear anybody kind of talking like Tom Reagan, giving a kind of philosophical position which explains why that is wrong? It's more like, well, just look, isn't it?
Oh yes. I kind of think that. Well, they're sort of, in a sense, they're, I suppose, expected people to make the connection, say, oh, so that's how fur coats are produced. So, oh, blimey, I won't wear one anymore. Like as if those people never thought about it.
Yeah, but you see, we're back to butting our head against culture then, because in the vegan world, being against cruelty means veganism. In the real world, it doesn't mean that at all.
No, in the real world, being against cruelty is what most people think now.
They're already there, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. That's their mentality now. It's very rare to meet someone where you say, "Hey, do you think animal cruelty is a good thing?" And they go, "Oh, yeah."
I kind of think what the idea is, because it's kind of based on cruelty, say that it's, say it's wrong to, say if you're just talking about, like, say the consumption of animal products, the kind of message that's put out, it's wrong to consume animal products because the process of creating those products involves cruelty, you see. So therefore they're constantly having to show people the cruelty to kind of justify that claim, aren't they? I want to show you that the production of your meat or your dairy products that you consume is cruel. I want to show you that it's cruel so that you stop doing it. That's kind of what I think what's going on. You see,
but the point is for them, it can't not be cruel. You see, that's their position.
It can't not be cruel, but you see, ordinary people.
Ordinary people will say, well, show me the non-cruel one, and they say, well, there isn't a non-cruel one, and that then means you're then in the quagmire of cultural speciesism again, because you're in the welfare paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
It also means that they're constantly having to prove that things are cruel, because you'll get a farm come along and saying, oh no, our animals are
well, even if you're able to, by showing them the videos, the public will go, okay, well let's take the cruelty out of it then, because they don't.
Absolutely. Let's find a way of doing it without cruelty, and then it'd be okay. Because
Which is what everybody wants, because everybody wants their meat, in inverted commas, but nobody wants the cruelty. And animal welfare says that you can have those two things. The vegans come along and say, no, you can't. Okay, and so that causes the kind of like, well, why? You know, the RSPCA say I could, my culture says I could, my upbringing says we could. You know, surely there must be a way of doing it. And so that becomes their search. Their search then is for the non-cruel use, which is also the promise of animal welfareism.
Oh yes, and it also
we just get bogged down with welfare all the time.
It massively overcomplicates things, because if the message is, look, you know, these animals are being exploited and killed, that, you know, that's wrong. You know, like we don't need to kill these animals for food. So why are we doing it? It has to be wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you see, the point is, there's no point in saying, well, why is it wrong, and say because it's cruel.
No, you don't need. No, you know, in my outreach, I don't talk about cruelty at all. You know, I might talk. You know, if it comes up from the other person, you know, about the conditions, I don't talk. I just say, well, look, you know.
Well, that gives you the opportunity to explain why you're not cruelty based if somebody brings it up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's much simpler. I mean, the argument for veganism was certainly, you know, like the argument for avoiding consuming animal products, is really, really simple. It's absolutely really simple. We don't need to do it. We can live perfectly well without doing it. So why are we slaughtering all these animals? That has to be wrong. It has to be immoral. It has to be unethical. And that's the end of the argument. That's as simple as that. You don't need to go talk about cruelty at all. You know, you don't need to. You know, it's just, and you don't need to get. And then you get bogged down in arguments about, you know, as we've seen on that video that we had on our Still Alive show with Earthling Ed, where he had the argument with it's the slaughterhouse, the butcher that had the slaughterhouse or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
An argument about how, you know, whether the animals suffered or not when they were being killed.
It was a percentage of times where the stunning system worked.
Yeah. Well, why can't I go there? That's irrelevant. Are you killing those animals? Yes, I am. Well, that's wrong, isn't it? Why are you doing that when we don't need to do that? We can live perfectly well without doing it. It must be wrong.
This is the cultural problem, is the fact that killing our fellow animals is not wrong in the culture, and it's not even wrong in the theory of Peter Singer.
No.
So the killing of them is not the problem. It's what you do with them while they're alive that's a problem.
Yeah. But you see, the trouble is that's all kind of human supremacist, because if that was a human, the killing, the fact that the human was killed would be like of vital importance, wouldn't it? Even if the human was killed totally, you know, if I went up to someone in the street and just killed them without them knowing anything about it, right? And there was no suffering involved. That would still be regarded as wrong, as horrendously wrong, wouldn't it?
Well, then they'd jump to the effect on their family and stuff, then, wouldn't they?
Well, you can say it was just a homeless person on the street that had no family, and that person was killed. You know, that would still be regarded as wrong, wouldn't it? You can kind of you can take out all these objections, can't you? And actually, you know. But you see, so therefore, in a sense, you know, this reliance on cruelty does you know, is there still some human supremacism lurking there, where people feel that they have to talk about cruelty and they can't talk about, you know, the killing in a situation where the killing of a human would be wrong, you know?
Well, my fear on that is the fact that because we have a movement made up, generally speaking, of welfareists, which is my worry, that, you know, deep down, scratch below the surface, and we're talking about, you know, welfarism and also welfarists. That's the problem. But of course, they reject those words like welfare. They much prefer animal liberation, animal rights. But in terms of their fundamental position, you've got to wonder whether it's actually really welfare.
Yeah, of course. In the same way that bigots don't like being called bigots, right? They prefer to be called like liberationists or freedom fighters or anything else.
Patriots.
Yeah, the truth is the truth.
I think there's I think there is a situation is kind of quite complicated. Like I said before, that those people personally, are against all exploitation of other animals, or many of them are, probably maybe the majority of them are. It's just that they don't use that. They don't. That's not in their claims making. If you see what I mean, that's the problem. That they're kind of
yeah, but also then you've got to ask the question: well, why? Because they think they're special or something. I
think with most, it's just that they're just carrying on with the language that's already there. This kind of has is something that.
Do you think it's because they don't trust? They don't trust the full kind of liberationist, rights message. They feel as though they've got to kind of temper it down a little bit because, they don't want to overwhelm people or something like that. Do you think?
I don't know. I mean, genuinely, Roger, how many people do you think, just from like doing outreach and stuff, have actually at some point in their life had those two choices in front of them and picked welfare, or just the case that nobody's ever talked to them about rights or made that argument in front of them? Because the vast majority of people that I speak to, when you explain rights to them, they'll never talk about welfare ever again. But they've never had it talked about before. No one around them mentions that. No one else has ever corrected it. No one else has ever challenged it. No one else talks about anything any different.
Well, it's because welfare is the default position of everybody. Mm-hmm. As we said, we're actually socialized as human beings into a speciesist culture. At the same time, the speciesist culture is imbued with animal welfare ideas. So, don't be cruel is something that parents tell their children. Nobody wants to see their kids being cruel to our fellow animals. And so we teach them about their animal companions, don't be cruel and all this kind of stuff. And we'd like to think that is the value that we take throughout life. At the same time, eating flesh is also the norm. So they're trying to kind of marry those two ideas.
Mm. Yeah, and they don't go together too well. There's a bit of a conflict there.
And the trouble is, someone becoming vegan now, and say then wanting to go on to become a campaigner. What is it they've seen and listened to? And kind of read already, overwhelmingly, all that's going to be talking about cruelty, isn't it? So they're going to carry on the same way, aren't they? And that's the difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, even some of the books that are like literally written to help people to come to these conclusions. How are they titled? How to Argue with Meat Eaters. Well, what does that teach them about veganism just from the front cover? That we're arguing with people and it's food focused.
Well, I think Ronnie is right that it is very complicated. I mean, for example, if you go back to the 1970s, you've got Peter Singer saying that he can't see an ethical problem with free-range egg production.
No, but at least the title of that book sounds like it means something, even if the content's no good.
Yeah.
Whereas like the people that are browsing in, say, like Waterstones or somewhere that walk past Ed's book, what's the idea that they're going to get? I mean, the thing that's kind of worked for Singer over the years is that title, because it misleads people. Whereas Ed's book, you're going to look at that and think, how to argue with meat eaters. Like that's telling me what this is supposed to be. And it's about arguing about food.
Well, and then you've got the Melanie Joy books, which are basically saying that it's possible to, create eggs and dairy without violence. Yeah. And of course, people, then you got vegans adopting carnism as their name.
That's pretty standard. Let's go put it there. The pair of you on a daily basis, how many times do you hear or people type the word speciesism versus carnism? Because it's getting to the point where I see carnism more often than I do speciesism.
I think people don't understand. I think a lot of those people have never read anything by Melanie Joy.
Yeah, they just repeat. They think the word
Yeah.
carnist is quite cool, don't they? They like the word. They like the fact that it's a natural insult, whereas I don't think that species obviously has that effect.
No.
Well, some activists have argued that, oh yeah, but carnism has evolved from the way that Melanie Joy meant it when she coined it, right? It's as though we vegans have taken this vegetarian concept off Melanie Joy and made it a vegan concept.
All right. Did they? Well, they haven't told all the vegans for a start, so there's one problem. But two, unless you tell all the non-vegans and make them understand, then it's totally pointless.
Yeah, well,
us rebranding a word to mean something else is part of the problem now, because we keep trying to rebrand cruelty and abuse.
Yeah, I just looked at the chat and someone said, and I think we're probably going to have to wind up soon, aren't we? Because it's gone on ever. Somebody said most people don't understand speciesism. Well, most people maybe don't understand what the word is, but the idea of speciesism, that it's wrong for humans to oppress and exploit other animals. In other words, if in a particular situation.
Yeah, but how is carnism less obscure?
Carnism is just as obscure, but I think it's quite easy to explain to people. People might not understand what the word is, but it's quite easy to explain to people what it means. It's quite easy to you can kind of get people to be opposed to speciesism without even mentioning the word speciesism, because you can explain to them actually what it is and why they should be opposed to it.
Would you not agree that if you had to have the word speciesism in front of you and carnism, it's actually easier to explain speciesism, isn't it?
Of course it is. Yes, of course it is. Of course it is. It's easier to explain.
So how come vegans are in love with the word carnism then?
I think it kind of
sounds like an insult.
The sound of it. It's the sound of it.
Literally the fact that it sounds like an insult, and they can go, "Oh, carnist," whereas people going speciesist doesn't really have that ring to it.
It's easier to say. Speciesist can kind of get your mouth in a bit of a twist, can't it, sometimes?
Yeah.
Whereas carnist is kind of like an easier word to say, and it could be as simple as that, to be quite honest.
So when vegans say carnist, they mean speciesist.
A lot of the time, but also obviously it's mentioned in Carnage as well, at that kind of like big scene where the whole world reverses roles. We're no longer this. You're carnists. So like that's a pivotal moment that people think is probably a bit more realistic than it is.
Yeah. Anyway, folks, we better wind up.
Yeah, no, let's call it a night anyway. But no, they're very interesting, and obviously we'll be back again same time next week.
We didn't talk about Operation Valentine, so maybe
we'll save that for next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few things on the list that are still there, so don't worry about
Operation Valentine is very interesting.
Yeah, there's a real interesting story about a Scottish raid as well on a beagle breeding farm. That's a really interesting story.
Well, at least we know we've got a part 3 of the ALF then as well.
Yes, I wonder if we'll have a part 4.
Might even have a part 4 at this rate. Yeah, absolutely. There's plenty to try and squeeze in at the end of the day, and there's no rush to do it. So even if it ends up being 5 or 6 parts, it's no big toil. Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks so much. As always, take care, and thank you so much, chat, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye-bye then. Bye.